The carriage came promptly, driven by George Walgan's paid man. Beside him, Thomas Tankard, the lawyer. Any other woman might have felt uneasy climbing into a carriage with two men and no chaperone. But other women were not Jemima. Though wearing a dress, she knew she could take Tankard on at least, and could outwit Tom Harry at a pinch. The journey was over quickly, for Cardew, on the outskirts of Truro, was only a distance of about 10 miles on good roads, and Jemima relaxed a little, recalling carriage rides with Davis Giddy and Humphrey Davy, as they roamed the countryside. The wilder north gave way to the more genteel south, and the townhouse belonging to George Walgan came into view along the Truro road. Both men stood when the carriage drew to a halt, Tom Harry opening the door and folding down the steps for her. "Miss Withering," Tankard acknowledged, and Jemima bowed her head to him. "I was at Grace for the benefit of leisure," Jemima told herself, as the thought suddenly came to her, had George discovered she had been moonlighting, literally, last week, and was questioning her terms of employment? Because it was true, and Miss Withering. George Walgan turned as Tom Harry announced her arrival at the entrance of Cardew's drawing room. A much better arrangement than the last time Tom Harry had brought her there, abducted in the dead of night. Unfortunately, the leery uncle was by the fireplace. Jemima turned her attention to George Walgan. "Miss Withering," greeted Walgan, "I am glad to see you well. I understand from his physician that your father ails." "His physician, Humphrey?" Jemima asked. "Humphrey Davy has spoken to you." "The very same, Miss Withering," Carrie Walgan growled, though not out of aggression. It was his manner of speech. "Dr. Davy, of the Royal Institution. He came by air to tell us of these or samples," George Walgan interrupted. "He champions your cause very highly indeed. And I have promised to send these on to him in London." Jemima looked at the rocks. Not the ones from Grace. These looked as if they contained a good proportion of copper, by their blue-green coloration. From leisure, George confirmed. "Captain Betty's went to the smelters by Hale to get them assayed. Master Davy brought them back, certified." "Kapoor, Ms. Withering," Uncle Carrie told her. Jemima ignored the searching of the man's eyes on her frame. George did not, however, and took a step between her and his uncle. "And Betty's tells me you showed him how to make the engine work." George took up the dialogue again. "An engine you helped develop, Miss Withering, with your own money?" Now George Walgan's tone changed, a chill to it now. "So I will ask you this once, Miss Withering, is yours a poke-bogey theory?" "Mr. Walgan," Jemima exclaimed, "on no account. Stratification is only connected to steam engines because it is with a steam pump lower levels out to dig or a broken bar." She noticed Tom Harry had not left the room. A broken bar. George Walgan thought she was cheating him. "Some broken bar?" "If Master Davy say these," she moved towards the low table on which George had put the ore samples, "and as you yourself can see just how green and red they are, surely you want to continue digging towards Will Grace." "It's what you asked me to do when Poldark refused my professional advice." And what? That she had been spending time tricking Poldark that she was an ordinary worker over the last 3 months and had a similar ore line in Leisure's direction. A broken bar? A broken bar maybe, if the uncle wasn't a broken bar. "I showed Henry Betty's how to make the engine work," Jemima confirmed. "It is true, no mine can work with no pumping engine unless the target material is extremely shallow. Coal, yes, seams can be shallow, but not copper." Jemima glanced across to Tankard, who was loitering near the French window. "And I expect, Mr. Walgan, you will have petitioned these a broken bar Reverend House to lift what's embargo on all Cornish steam engines." "I know Sir Francis Bassett has been over to Penstraws personally." George shifted his feet. Perhaps it was the uncle who had demanded George Walgan meet with her. "A broken bar have," he admitted. But then, his voice hardened, and Walgan frowned at Jemima. "I understand you had given money to Trevithick for an engine." And there it was. George, or possibly Carrie Walgan, thought there was some underhand dealing. "I did," Jemima told him. "Mr. Tankard," she acknowledged, nodding her head. For it would be the man who managed George Walgan's finances who would have discovered this. For the development of a new type of engine, tankard, his ratty featured bending in question towards Jemima. The worn at the censure of the suit by what? Finished Carrie Walgan, impatiently. Jemima shook her head. What I invested in was a movable engine, wholly different to a stationary engine, which must sit within the mine. Dick, that is, Master Trevithick, has been developing an engine on wheels, powered by its own steam. What's lawsuit a broken bar? Jemima trailed off, and shook her head. That's pure vindictiveness. Even now, Lord Bassett is preparing the case that no patent infringement has ever taken place, that we dismantled and modified the Watt engine. He even paid for Master Trevithick's legal fees. So you have a vested interest in Golcoth? George asked primly, dismissively. In the engine, not the mine, Mr. Walgan, but what I am really interested in is using the theory that William Smith described to me on rock here in Cornwall, as is being used across the country. She glanced from Georgie to Carrie, and then across to Tankard. They were testing her. Should this be in any way a danger to her, Jemima was certain it would not be taking place in the middle of a Tuesday. And, it is as I said, the reason my father's investment came well in the end was that Smith's theory was applied to the Blue Joan mine in Derbyshire. The predicted seams were found and substantial profit was had by all. And, suppose, continued Carrie Walgan, Jemima resisting the urge to put her arms around herself in protection, Master Trevithick Knees is prosecuted? Then, I lose my money and every metal mine in Cornwall closes. There was silence for a short time, each of the three men thinking on her words. Tom Harry, meanwhile, was picking a bit of food from between his teeth with a shard of wood. Then, George Walgan stepped towards Jemima, and gave her a polite bow. Looking back, that almost swung it. Almost. Miss Withering, may you be so good as to wait in the parlour? I need some words with my partner Sir Broken Bar. He looked at his uncle. And my staff a Broken Bar. At this, he looked to Tankard. The man gave a weak smile. The chair was most comfortable, and tea was offered to Jemima as she waited, which she accepted. Queensware, Wedgwood, no less than the best. And she found that, if she were to move her chair a little to the left, she could catch some of the words which were being launched around George Walgan's withdrawing room. ... Shareholders meeting a Broken Bar. ... Use Dregovo to divert profits to get through ironstone to the copper a Broken Bar. ... What if you have bypassed Tregovi altogether a Broken Bar? There was a pause. In Cardew's drawing room, George rounded on his uncle. I have my mining engineer. The girl. You can't expect a woman to know anything. Not only did she find us 8 parcels, nearly 1,000 tons of copper ore she has helped us extract. Helped you? Helped you? Carrie roared back. She swings the pick herself, does she? Tankard looked between the two of them, recognizing the fury and knowing it would be over very quickly. However, it was he who had interrupted George Walgan, not Uncle Carrie. George rounded on his secretary. She does, and works, currently for no wages. I am loath to lose her from leisure, but lose her we might, to Wild, at Ting Tong, where her expertise with steam pumps, what's steam engine to be precise, is what they will be looking into. Do not underestimate Ms. Withering's worth, Uncle, he added, guessing that Carrie Walgan had been about to say something on those lines. I do not deny Trevorgy to continue Renfrew, has sold his shares to Walgan. George glanced to Tankard, who nodded. At over 100 each, Thomas Tankard confirmed, nodding. And the gunpowder, but he did not continue, for Jemima had knocked on the door, and had not waited for an invitation to come back in. Mr. Walgan, Jemima declared, for she had to tell him, he had to know. Mr. Walgan, she repeated, fighting to gain composure. 'Tis such a fine day for nearly spring. Should we walk in your marvellous garden? So many plants are near to bloom, which, should they be in my own childhood soil, would take nigh another month to develop on so Broken Bar. Had he not decided to trust her, Jemima would be heading home now, having lost her only chance to prove stratification and turn a profit for a mine owner. Instead, to the scowl of his uncle, or perhaps, because of it, George brightened his face and nodded. "I would that you would show me, Miss Withering, that I should learn more of nature and of plants." Half an hour later and they were heading back across the Italianate gardens. Jemima felt relieved. George stopped their progress some way off Cardew's doors, however, and told Jemima, "You have given me more than enough information to make me assured of what you tell me." Carrie Walgan was watching them from the window, and he saw his nephew place a hand on the girl's forearm, talking, insisting, on something. "I am leading the miners my way," Jemima told him. As Poldark ice a broken bar otherwise detained, the management ice a broken bar as not as coordinated as it could otherwise be. "Miss Withering," George interjected. "No," Carrie Walgan shouted, in the privacy of his mind. "Do not form an attachment to the girl, or Poldark could be right." And Jemima Withering and George Walgan came to an accord. And, long after George's coach had departed to return Jemima Withering back to Meadowsweet, Carrie Walgan felt he could hold his tongue no longer. So, what did he talk about whilst he were gallivanting around the pretty flowers? He demanded to know. "Something," George told his uncle, cryptically, as he sipped his canary wine. Uncle Carrie had already finished his in one mouthful. But, did George Walgan have any comprehension as to what was to befall them all in that 10 square miles of Kernow between then and the end of the year? "Grace," Carrie scoffed, "you'd be better off trying to acquire all of the ding-tongs," he added, "particularly as no engine be working it now." "No official engine, anyway." "Yes, uncle," George confirmed, giving his servant back the sherry glass. "I am decided. I plan to get ownership of Will Grace. 88,888,888, 5th of March 1791, St. Perrin's Day, Gemina's 18th birthday." The wood of the handle was gnarled and shaped, molded by the many hands that had held it before her. Jemima Withering followed the line of lanterns, placed in a line following the underground passage, angles and facets made large by the shadows. She knew those lanterns, knew those men. For had not this been a similar scene, nearly a year before, but in a different mine? Picks and shovels shouted at the rock to yield, lugubrious cheers echoed through the tunnel as lumps fell like dying men on a battlefield. Jemima followed Chigo Martin and Ted Carkeek onwards, to the north of Will Grace. She had seen the day in by spending the night with Dick Trevithick. If he had been distraught, Dick had not shown it. The house had been in darkness, but Jemima, who had been tossing the irresolvable facts around in her mind, the court injunction, the steam engine embargo, the promise to George Walgan, and so, being awake in those early hours. "Whence do you go?" Jemima asked. "Now," Dick told her. "To Derby, to Madley. Edward has lent me money. My father is at ATHD. I know. I saw him be admitted before I left, before my father disowned me." Thus, the huge Cornishman had come to Jemima Withering, trusting she would accept his vulnerability, confide his grief. He had truly lost everything. Regardless of everything, Dick, Jemima assured him, her words, later, being something she would tax herself over, "I love you. You should not be blamed for this. What is wrong? So is Sir Francis, and your father." "I gave written to Davis a broken bar. You should not have been set up to take the blame." "I know." Jemima paused, then threw her arms around him, knowing full well he was an unmarried man in the bedroom of an unmarried woman, at night. Her meaning was clear. After which, there had been no more time for small talk. Dick had taken her hands from his body, then pulled her to him, Jemima pushing herself up on her tiptoes. Even this effort had not allowed her to reach Dick's mouth, and he scooped her up into his huge, muscular arms and made up the difference. Everything about Richard Trevithick was enormous, as Jemima was soon found out. She had been willing, she had wanted to be as close to him as she possibly could, for when would she see him again? And had left her bed, just before dawn, touching her face with a tenderness that his countenance would otherwise have belied, for Madley, Shropshire, to Abraham Darby, to build his secret engine. Jemima had walked with him, watching him leave, on foot, to the Penzance Bodmin Road, her money in his pocket for the stage. Jemima had turned back towards home, crept back into her room before spending the day with her father, as Humphrey tended him and spoke in hushed tones about his heart, about his body, that he would need more care and that he was going back to Bristol. Neither John Withering nor Humphrey Davy mentioned her birthday, and it was only from the church bells ringing out at the church that Jemima realized that the day belonged to Street Perrin, and could not sleep. It was late Friday evening that, in the darkness of the night, she trod the land, heading east until the engine housing of Wheel Grace was picked out by the light of the full moon, its double-headed pump that she and Dick had fitted working as rhythmically at nearly midnight as it would if it were nearly midday. The determination was growing, and had reached a raging inferno that had seared away her feelings of loss and fear. She was going, once more, into enemy territory. It was Poldark himself who took her cloth cap, and had nodded through Jimmy West, who had caught up with Jago and Ted on the upper corridor. "Amanini, Zua," Jemima intoned, looking away and touching her cloth cap. Hours ago, Dick had been loving Jemima, as her 18th birthday dawned. She had wanted so badly to go with him, back to her childhood home. But there was something she needed to do first, prove that William Smith's stratification applied to the metal laws of her native country. And so, beside Jago and Ted, she dug, and came back the next day to dig again. After a week, the rock was beginning to confess, copper was yielding to more copper. A lode was beginning, in a straight line, in the direction of Wheal Leisure,